everyone. My name is Gwen Saul,
And I am the curator of ethnology here at the New York State Museum. And ethnology is really another way of saying cultural anthropology. So I have the privilege of helping to direct the growth of our contemporary Native art collection at the State Museum. And we grow every year with new art pieces. And so I'm going to share with you in a very brief amount of time, a very limited number of some of our most recent purchases, and I'm so excited to do that with you today. And I wanted to start by saying Sego and Kulamasi. Those are the languages of Munsee-speaking Mohican and Unkechaug, Haudenosaunee, Mohawk peoples, whose ancestral lands the museum is located upon and where I live and work. And I do that because I want to offer up to you a theme today to appreciate Native art, which is thinking about relationships. And my work here at the museum is very concerned with thinking through how we might develop, grow reciprocal relationships with Native artists, Native nations, and Native people across what is now New York. So our contemporary Native art collection is growing with artwork by Native artists whose ancestral territories lie within what is now New York. That includes all 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Shinnecock Nation, and Unkechaug Nation, which are both on what is now Long Island. But back to relationships for a moment. I began with a land acknowledgement because I want to impress upon you the importance of our relationships. And I think right now, this time, we're all frantically rethinking our relationships. How do we sustain them? How do we grow new ones? How do we stay sane living with people that we're very close to, but sometimes they drive us nuts? And so really taking the time to think about our relationships to one another. And that extends throughout my work here at the State Museum. So I want to begin with these 2 pieces of art. This is by Sam Jacobs, these mucklucks, Foxy Lady, and they are a beautiful example of Haudenosaunee glass beadwork and caribou tufting. Sam is from Cattaraugus Territory, Seneca Nation, and she actually learned the art of tufting from Jamie Jacobs, who did the quilled pouch next to these mucklucks. And so already you can see that our collection has another kind of relationship in it. We have artists who are teaching other artists, inspiring other people to try new art forms. And I think it's really important to remember that Haudenosaunee people and Native people have been making art for millennia. And so I want to share with you those art forms today, but I also want to impress upon you that there is also a long history of intellectual discourse and debate and opinion and coming to difficult decisions that is also very much part of Indigenous people's histories and daily life even now. So the quilled pouch by Jamie Jacobs over here is actually a replica piece from the Ethnographic Museum in Sweden, a quilled pouch that was collected by a European and I believe dates to the 18th century. If you're interested more in the relationship of porcupine quills, porcupines, which are known as the boss animals of the game animals for Haudenosaunee people, and the art of using porcupine quills, I highly recommend this volume of Iroquois, which features in it a article on quilled bags by Mike Galvin, Mono Lake Paiute Washoe, curator extraordinaire out at Indigena. So the next piece I want to show you is by Wilma Zampano Cook, and it's called The Vessel. And it is shaped like a Haudenosaunee pot with those beautiful round forms and this collar on top. And it also features distinctive Haudenosaunee raised beadwork. So those beautiful flowers at each castellation around the pot feature those voluptuous, accentuated, just over the top beaded loops that is a distinguishing factor of Haudenosaunee raised beadwork, and something that Haudenosaunee women did and continue to do today as a way to provide for their families. What I think is particularly interesting and what I think about when I see the vessel is that one of the words in Mohawk for earth, for land, for clay, and for clan is Audra. And so that means that one of the ways in which, one of the translations of the question, what clan are you from, is actually, what is the clay made of where you are from? And that's really a profound thought, to think about people establishing their relationships to one another through clan connections, through geography, through political affiliation, but also through pottery. And this beautiful art form that involves multiple people learning how to make clay, learning how to sift the clay properly, and what that means. So you can read more about that, because the linguistic knowledge there about the term Audra comes from work by Elizabeth Dockstader, and it's also featured in this amazing book by Susan Hill, who really takes an interest in critically examining archival sources and also bringing into focus the rich oral histories of Haudenosaunee people that really help define what we can learn about Haudenosaunee people and our relationships with them as well. Next, I want to share with you Seeking Peace, which is behind here, this beautiful bas-relief wooden carved artwork by Robert Delamonte and Murisa Printup of the Tuscarora Nation. It's called Seeking Peace. And in August 2018, the Great Law of Peace recital was held on the Tuscarora Nation, something that had not happened since the early 1700s, when Tuscarora people were forced to flee their homeland due to the brutality of settler colonists, and joined the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, or rejoined, and now, of course, what is now New York. And this Great Law recital is really important because it is a chance for Haudenosaunee people to gather together, to listen to the instructional words and inspiring message of the Great Law of Peace, and to once again, in terms of relationships, understand the importance of those relationships to each other and how to incorporate them into daily life. What does it mean to have relationships to a clan? What are those responsibilities? What are those obligations? Because a relationship with someone always involves mutual effort, right, on both of our parts. And so this piece has a lot of symbolism reflective of that relationship between the Tuscarora Nation and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So you'll notice the different clan mothers who are all offering up their wisdom, their support, and the gastoas, the special adornment for chiefs, to the great tree of peace here, and the eagle on top of the great tree of peace that protects and looks out.
We have a question asking if this is hand-carved.
It is. At least if it isn't, I know Robert will correct me. But Robert and Murisa have a shop, Tuscarora Woodworks, and they make everything themselves. So this particular book by Theresa McCarthy isn't specifically about the Tuscarora Nation, but it is taking a very close look at the history of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I think one of the really important things and takeaways from that book is that like any great entity involving multiple nations, multiple communities, multiple people, there are always periods of disagreement, of thinking through those disagreements, different opinions sometimes. It doesn't take away from the strength of a confederacy. It's simply how we work and live together. We aren't always in agreement all the time. So I highly recommend that book. And actually, I also want to recommend too Mohawk Interruptus by Audra Simpson, which takes a very close look at the complexities of citizenship. Again, thinking about relationships. What is the relationship for people whose ancestral territory is bisected national boundary, such as Unkechaug Mohawk Nation? What does that mean for Kahnawake people whose ancestral homelands is here in the Hudson Valley area? Both of these books, Theresa, McCarthy, and Audra Simpson, also take a really close look at how Haudenosaunee history has been portrayed and represented, and a really critical examination that I think is important for all of us to consider, non-Native and Native alike. So I want to end with this beautiful photograph by Shinnecock photographer Camille Seaman. This is an individual named Dan Namakan, and he's standing on the Lakota Sioux Standing Rock Nation's land. And this was during a time when hundreds of Indigenous nations were coming together to support the efforts of water protectors who were vital in reminding all of us about the relationship that we have as human beings with each other, but also to the land and to water. And their apt concern had to do with an oil pipeline that was slated to go right through Lakota territory, and not following correct procedure and processes for that, but even more importantly, endangering the lives of people and animals and land and water. And Camille was out there and took this picture of Dan Namakan in the middle of these efforts, when once again Indigenous peoples were reminding all of us and putting their lives on the line. What are those relationships? How can we sustain life? How can we continue to sustain our relationships? We need to recognize our resources, our land, our water, our animals, because without them we can't continue. And if you're interested in Shinnecock history and the history for Indigenous peoples on Long Island, because Long Island is Indigenous land too, I highly recommend and have shared in the link for this video the website on this site, which is made by Jeremy Dennis, another Shinnecock photographer whose work is also represented in our collections. And this is his book, looking at oral histories and his photography work. But I highly recommend his website on this site because it's really a fabulous look at Indigenous history in different locations on Long Island. And I want to wish all of you good health and well-being. I'm thinking about you, especially my dear friends in the Southwest, my Diné friends, Karen and Bill. I hope you're okay. I'm wearing my scarf from Gallup, actually, for you today. So I look forward to the day when I can see everyone again. So take care, you guys.
And we actually have a few questions. Is it okay if we answer some? Sorry.
Yes.
That was a beautiful send-off, but I wasn't able to get to them. We had questions, first of all, about how the beads were attached to this piece and confirmation that they are glass beads, because we had questions about what the beads were made out of, and I know you touched on that.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave the whether or not they are glass beads or not for one on here to someone like Grant Jonathan, who would tell you that in a second. But this is actually formed around a glass vase, so that's what helps give it its shape, just so you know. And then, as you can see, the beadwork for these castellation flowers are actually done individually on little pieces of leather and then sewn to the panels of fabric. And then here, they're just directly sewn onto the actual velvet. And that's actually really hard to do because it's easy to squish the velvet with your fingers while you're sewing those tiny beads on. So it's really are able to pull off a piece like this and not have your thumbprint all over the velvet.
And I think our other question went back to this piece, asking more information about quill work.
Ooh. Well, let's see, what can I say here? So the dyes that are used on quills these days tend to be fabric dyes, commercial fabric dyes, as opposed to using vegetal dyes, which they would have been, of course, in the 18th century. And what I love about this, and Jamie can correct me if he's on here too, is that you see different ways to use quills and to sew them. So this is smoked leather, and here you see one style of using the quill, twisting it, and then sewing it down almost as if it's one piece of thread. And that's right next to another technique of using quill work where you're actually flattening the quills and laying them down and alternating and then stitching them in place as you go. Sort of folding, stitching, folding, stitching. So that's another technique for quill work.
Perfect, thank you. Okay,
Is that it?
I think that's it.
All right. You can always send me other questions at my work email, but thank you.